How do we structure government systems that pool resources and hence facilitate some redistribution, because I actually believe in redistribution, at least at a certain level, to make sure that everybody's got a shot.
You could call this, in a neutral way, if we wanted to do that, is just a discussion on tax equity. We're going to have government, no matter who is the president, and you have to make just decisions on resources. Now, if you want this redistribution word, which is a word that I'm sure is intended to be befuddle people, because it's not a word that real people use.
Okay. Now you understand why they're not running this on the networks. Welcome to the Savage Nation. This is your president, way, way, way before he was a glint in the eye of the communists who put him in power, way before Soros ever heard of him, when he was just sort of an unknown guy. He was talking about redistribution. Now, as you know, everything about Obama is invented. There's virtually nothing that's real about him. He is the most fabricated individual in the history of American politics. The reason he has not been vetted is obvious. Had he been vetted, he wouldn't even be an FBI agent. In fact, had he been vetted, he couldn't become a Secret Service agent to protect himself. In fact, had he been vetted, he couldn't even be a Chicago cop. In fact, he's the most invented individual in the history of America. One of the best articles on this is a series of 10 articles that's just come out today in the Washington Examiner. That's astounding, by Mark Tapscott. He's the editor-in-chief. And it's in 10 chapters. A Childhood of Privilege, Not Hardship is chapter 1. And it talks about how First Lady Michelle Obama and her husband invented a life for themselves that was not real. And we're going to talk about that on the Savage Nation and ask how, in spite of the fact, or shall I say despite the fact, that Obama is a complete phony and a fraud, you're going to find out that he actually threw black people out of tenements in Chicago in the middle of the winter as a lawyer for a wealthy owner of these tenements. You'll find out other things he's done to the poor that have been buried by the drug addicts in the mainstream media. But before we go into the 10-part series on the Savage Nation, we will learn everything about Obama that the mainstream media has hidden. I want to talk about redistribution to show you how dangerous it really is. It sounds benign, redistribution. After all, you could say, well, by paying taxes, we're already redistributing wealth. The best and most concise article on this is by Thomas Sowell in Investors.com. I linked it on michaelsavage.com for those of you who still read. His article is worth quoting. Fallacy of redistribution has grave economic impact. I wouldn't put it that way, but that's the way Thomas does. And I'm going to read you some of it. The recently discovered tape on which Barack Obama said back in 1998 that he believes in redistribution is not really news. But the tape surfacing may serve a useful purpose if it gets people to thinking about the consequences of redistribution. Those who talk glibly about redistribution often act as if people are just inert objects that can be placed here and there like pieces on a chessboard. But if human beings have their own responses to government policies, then we cannot blithely assume that government policies will have the effect intended. The history of the 20th century is full of examples of countries that set out to redistribute wealth and ended up redistributing poverty. The communist nations were a classic example, but by no means the only example. In theory, confiscating the wealth of the more successful people ought to make the rest of the society more prosperous. But when the Soviet Union confiscated the wealth of successful farmers, food became scarce. As many people died of starvation under Stalin in the 1930s as died in Hitler's Holocaust in the 1940s. How can that be? It is not complicated. You can only confiscate the wealth that exists at a given moment. You cannot confiscate future wealth. And that future wealth is less likely to be produced when people see that it is going to be confiscated. Farmers in the Soviet Union cut how much time and effort they invested in growing their crops when they realized that the government was going to take a big part of the harvest. Listen to this. They slaughtered and ate young farm animals that they would normally keep tending and feeding while raising them to maturity. People in industry in America, for example, are not inert objects either. Moreover, unlike farmers, industrialists are not tied to the land in a particular country. Financiers are less tied down, especially today when vast sums of money can be dispatched electronically to any part of the world. If confiscatory policies can produce counterproductive repercussions in a dictatorship, they are even harder to carry out in a democracy. A dictatorship can suddenly swoop down and grab whatever it wants. But a democracy must first have public discussions and debates. Those who are targeted for confiscation can see the handwriting on the wall and act accordingly.